We've got the portal authority, Max Olson, on the show. So I like that we've veered into this direction with the conversation of how do you determine now team talent when so many players are coming out of the transfer portal. Ole Miss is probably the most extreme example, but
but look at USC.
Yeah, USC is another great example. But even Tennessee, I think, Brew McCoy, they get his recruiting ranking from high school, but Hendon Hooker was a decent recruit, but what's Hendon Hooker now? He'd be a 5-star now. He wouldn't have been a 5-star coming out of Virginia Tech, though. It's very strange how
the thing that gets murky there, Andy, is that if you re-rate, because here's the thing: everybody looks at the recruiting rankings. I don't know if a lot of fans look at the team talent composite. Is that fair?
I think so.
And I think that we're probably veering towards a future where the team talent composite in a given year is far more relied upon than the recruiting rankings before it to give us a gauge. And by doing so, I think the conventional wisdom, and we'll let Max answer this, is that we would re-rank or re-rate the players who transfer based on the information that we have to give us a more, complete picture of how talented a team is going to be in that year. But the problem with that is that if you only re-rank the players who are transferring in, but you don't re-rank the players that over or underachieve their high school ratings on the same roster, then you're not going to get the same complete picture. It's going to be fractured, right?
Right. It's what you're saying. It's a little more accurate, but it's not really accurate.
Yeah,
overall.
Because the whole point of the composite rankings isn't necessarily who outdid their ranking or who failed to achieve what their ranking indicated. It's the accumulation of the math and the averages out of, well, this guy hit, this guy missed, this guy hit, this guy missed, over the course of 85 people that give you a good idea of what that roster is made of. So I feel like if you do re-rank or you do, do the impossible, which is what if a player goes to a place for a year or two, doesn't play at all, and then leaves? How do you rank that guy? Mm-hmm. That's an issue. Mm-hmm. But then two, if you don't re-rank Hendon Hooker, then how are you going to re-rank anybody who transferred in? It's not a very good metric to me. So how are we going to get to a point where we have a metric that is talent-based, that's as accurate as possible from scholarship 85 to scholarship 1?
Yeah, and pull up this comment, Andy, because I think this is a great point. There's a niche in the market for anyone who's paying attention here. I think that's 100%
exactly right.
We're describing a problem that somebody's going to solve. I think that I think you're right, Ari. There's a challenge here where we've kind of taken the first step of saying, okay, we're going to take a recruiting class, and then we're going to take your portal class. And a portal class is not a term we even really used a couple of years ago, right? And of trying to evaluate, well, how did you do in transfer recruiting, compared to others? How, what's the quality of the players you brought in? And then trying to kind of smush those together and say, here's how your overall class ranks. But you're right, there's a problem in that, which is that these are players at different phases of their career. And so then to try to combine that into a class ranking it's about the best you can do. But then to take the overall team talent, you're right. You're not really looking at the whole roster and taking the Hendon Hooker example of, well, is he really I assume he was a 4-star at the time. He was
a 4-star high school recruit.
Low 4-star.
I think it was mid 4-star. I think it was 250 or 200, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, taking or Jalen Hyatt, right, or whoever, and just saying, okay, well, what should the ranking be now? That is a challenging part of team talent, and one that, can you really regrade guys going into every season? That's going to be difficult.
Yeah. What about half the roster that hasn't played yet?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, half the roster at Alabama are 5-star prospects just waiting their turn.
Yeah. It is tougher now, and I kind of like that there isn't a cheat sheet anymore.
But then do you take Ari, should team talent be your top 40 players, basically?
I think team talent should be what players are rated in high school, no matter what, and combining them together the way that it is. I think that's the most accurate way to do it, because even though a player might be
a way to do it, but I think the upside of re-ranking is that you're introducing more information into the
sure, absolutely. And if you re-rank, and then you mesh them together, it might not be as accurate as you would like, but is it more accurate than how it's done now? Is a good.
I got
question.
you. I got
you. And this is why I asked this question, because I'm a firm believer in Bud Elliott's blue chip ratio. Well, guess what? If Tennessee were to win the national title, they're not in the blue chip ratio.
And that's where you have to, and I've, so like, what grade then do you, like, let's take the Brew McCoy example. So what grade do you use for Brew McCoy in doing the blue chip ratio?
Because he's a 5-star out of high school, but based on his production at USC, he's not.
No. The guy that Tennessee signed, you would not still call a 5-star.
But I think the talent composite is based on what the players on your team are physically capable of doing. I don't think it's necessarily how productive of a player have you been. How many players on your roster, 1 through 85, do you have that do things from a physical standpoint that other people just can't do? It's like, I don't know, this is probably the most extreme example that you can come up with, but watching Bryce Young play, like the things that he does are the reason why he was a 5-star prospect. This isn't coaching. He is a wizard, and I feel like the more players that you have on your team that illustrate freakish physical traits coming out of high school, the better your team is going to be. Some are going to make it, some aren't. But the cumulative aspect of that is what makes that a reliable thing. So that, to me, has always been the most important metric, because you have teams that have, achieved more than their composite ranking would indicate, but that just means that you're a hell of a talent evaluator. And I almost feel like if we use it as a crutch, the way that I have it sometimes, of like, this is the composite rankings for the talent, and here's how the season's going to end. If you really look at it, guys, the only thing that thing is good for is predicting the national champion or the teams that are going to play for a national championship. Right. If you go from teams 10 to 30, it's all over the place.
Right. It's not going to predict who the second or third best team in most Power 5 leagues is going to be even.
Right.
So
like when you say you kind of like the idea that it is kind of all over the place, Andy, it kind of already is, but in a world where we're always talking about who's going to win the national championship, it's a very easy metric to use when you're talking about those teams that are built that way. But if Tennessee were to win the national championship this year, I think it would be the first time ever that a team outside of the blue chip ratio won a national championship. I don't even know where they are right now. They're still not that far out of it.
They wouldn't be far out. I think they're like 18 or 19. Yeah. So yeah. It's not that
that
far.
Is still pretty far, because my tenet is there's only top 6 can do it. So if you
and
19
Bud,
in there,
Bud has a cut line of, I believe it's 60% of your players are 4 or 5-star recruits, or 50%. 50% of your players are either 4 or 5-star recruits. So Tennessee, I think actually next year will probably fall above the cut line anyway.
Here's where their roster breaks down, because I think it's important for people to visualize it who are listening. Tennessee's 85 scholarship players, 2 5-star prospects on the roster, 24 4-stars, and the rest are 3-stars. So that is, I think, roughly a third.
Yeah.
So that's not that. And like Alabama's, for reference point, the team that they just beat has 85 scholarship players, 14 are 5-star prospects, and 59 are 4-stars. They only have 11. They only have 11 3-stars in their entire roster.
Yeah, and that's why they traditionally beat people so much, and
probably why they'll end up winning it again.
Right. Well, and Tennessee has to play another team like that coming up in a few weeks. They've got to play Georgia.
Well, I think you're right, Ari. Like there's the thing that to sort of like, this is maybe a little too in the weeds, but part of it is like I think what I'm picking up from you is you want this to be the same conversation, right? So when you take the high school ranking, it's potential, it's how would they do anywhere. And when Bryce Young and DJ Uiagalelei are ranked, it's not about, well, do we think Bryce Young will be better at Alabama or DJ will be better at Clemson, right? It's just pure evaluation.
Yeah.
And I think
the thing that usually before they pick a school.
And I think it'll be interesting to see kind of how the recruiting services do this and kind of, because I think they need to probably staff up and do more of it in terms of grading transfers. Is so you take the history of what they've done in college, but how much do you let kind of the fit creep into that too, right? How much does that creep into, well, we're ranking Jackson Dart like this because he's going to go play for Lane Kiffin. And so we think maybe that makes him a 5 or whatever, right? Like that's going to be the thing where if you go a little bit too far in saying, well, these transfers are ranked like this because we think they're going to make a big impact for this team, then you're ranking transfers a totally different way than you're ranking high school.
And then you're also introducing bias into the equation too.
For sure.
And the hope is that bias is, listen, Everybody that listens to the podcast,
I mean,
like,
they're
hey,
biased
South,
anyways.
South,
They are
South.
literal
Yeah.
rankings. Like
No, but I'm saying if you're a person who lives in Oxford and you're re-ranking a transfer, you might be more inclined to, and I get maybe this happens too with local analysts with the high school players, but you might be more inclined to overrank Jackson Dart based on the fit of that rather than who he is as a person or a player. And I think that keeping it as faceless and nameless as possible and just going based on pure physical ability and then letting the coaches mold it, I think is the more pure way to do it. Especially considering the fact that not every single player that will have a chance to be re-operated, re-ranked or reanalyzed are going to have the same window of information. Like in the high school rank, theoretically, most of them go to camps and, a lot of these guys are analyzed in the very same way. Maybe the Southern players are more because there's more analysts down there. But when you start introducing the transfers, how do you can't analyze them all the same way because there's going to be a very degree of information available. Yeah. So it's going to be really tricky.
Well, and what you've just described, all of this, the pain in the butt of doing this is what coaches are dealing with as they decide how many scholarships do I use for high schoolers, what do I use in the portal. This is the conversation you and I had with Lane Kiffin 2 weeks ago, or same thing.
And they're trying to get real measurements on these players that are in the portal. Like if there was a combine where all these guys went to, that'd be great, right? Because then you could kind of have some clear data and try to help the ranking.
Oh, the transfer combine would be amazing.
But that's exactly what the NFL is. You know exactly who everybody is when you sign them.
Yep.
And obviously players, play above their draft and below it.
They still get it wrong half the time.
Yeah, and think about the amount of money that NFL draft rooms spend on analyzing the draft prospects and get them wrong.
Yep.
But I do think that it'll be interesting to see if the portal in 5 to 10 years produce, like if Tennessee were to win the national title this year, the portal would be the absolute reason why that occurred, probably, right? So if that happens,
not entirely, but it'd be a big.
No, I mean, obviously the reason is Jeremy Pruitt built a playoff caliber roster and just never got a chance to.
Well, it's either that or the portal. So you pick which one you want to drink down your gullet. But if you do put yourself in a spot where transfer portals are impacting teams enough that they can take teams that aren't traditionally built to win a national championship all the way, then you have to blow up the whole thing because you can't, if you want the metric to work, because at that point, then the composite rankings are wrong.
That's not my. I mean, Andy, you tell me if I'm wrong. That's not my sense of what I think. Tennessee's been a little bit more selective in taking guys. I don't know that Tennessee's on the level of Ole Miss and USC in terms of rebuilding.
No, they actually managed to keep a lot of guys, and I think Cedric Tillman, who's been out a little bit with an ankle injury, but had a 1,000-yard receiving season last year, is a great example of this. He caught 6 passes in 3 years, and he was going to transfer and Grant Firking, the walk-on receiver at Tennessee, told me like they had breakfast the day of the Texas A&M game in 2020. This was the final game of the season, the one where all the stuff came out about Jeremy Pruitt. And Cedric's like, hey, I think I should probably go in the portal. And Grant's like, okay, but there's a lot of dudes in the portal with no catches or 6 catches. Like, what do you think's going to happen? Because remember, Cedric wasn't a huge recruit either. And he's like, your best shot is actually probably stay here. And they had a few guys do that. And the Heupel staff came in and said, hey, give us a chance. And they did. And it stopped the bleeding. But Alias Gray pointing out Eric Gray would be huge for them. Yeah, Eric Gray, Wanye Morris, Key Lawrence. These are all guys who started Oklahoma now. Could still be at Tennessee. And they'd be a lot deeper than they are now. So all that stuff matters. Wanye Morris might have been at left tackle puking.
So if Tennessee wins the national championship this year, they are just an exception to the rule.
They are. And yes, because like if Ole Miss wins the national title this year, we could be like, oh, well, maybe this should be the new model for building a team.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah.
Then there's going to be programs that move towards we're going to take 15 transfers a year.
But you've also now just completely convinced me that Tennessee has no chance to win it all. So we'll see what
when
happens.
Tennessee Georgia week comes around, you're all in on the Dogs.
I don't know, man. They just beat Alabama at home, but that I think to me, if Josh Heupel were to win a national championship this year, would probably be amongst one of the more shocking results of any season in the history of the sport.